13th March, 1945. The morning mist hung low over the forest edge near the German border, the kind that clung to every trench, every pine needle, every breath. Private Alan Merrick wiped a sleeve across his fogged goggles, but the dampness only smeared the grit deeper. He had been awake for 22 hours straight, maybe more. Time blurred when artillery thunder and engine growls replaced any concept of day or night. Somewhere beyond the tree line, the ground trembled in rhythmic pulses, like a distant heartbeat. The men all felt it. They didn't need a spotter to tell them what it meant. A Tiger I, the deadliest thing on treads, was rolling toward their thin defensive line. Alan wasn't supposed to be in combat at all. He was an engineer, technically a field technician, with a talent for improvisations that his commanding officers alternated between praising and cursing. He could fix a generator using scrap wood, wire, and a tin cup. He once repaired a jammed 30 cal tripod with a bicycle chain. And last week, he had rerouted an entire communication node after a bombardment by pulling cable through an old chimney. But all that ingenuity meant nothing against 80 tons of armoured steel. His rifle lay beside him, barely cleaned, barely loaded. Engineers weren't meant to fight titans. The tiger's sound thickened the air, not just approaching, hunting. The men had stumbled onto a crossroads the Germans apparently wanted back, and now the enemy was sending their monster to reclaim it. A Sherman sat half hidden behind an embankment, its crew nervously whispering inside the turret. They had already lost 3 tanks in the last 48 hours, all to the same Tiger, a machine the men started calling the Reaper. Its gunner was rumoured to hit from 1,000 yards with a single shot. Its crew, veterans from the Eastern Front. Its armour, nearly invulnerable, unless you ran straight up to it with a wrench and suicidal courage. Alan crouched behind a collapsed farmhouse wall, watching the fog shift as though the tank's breath were moving it. The sergeant shouted orders, men scattering to positions, but everyone knew the truth. They were not prepared. They had bazookas, yes, but limited, and one already misfired that morning. They had mines, but not enough time to bury them. They had bravery, but bravery alone didn't pierce panzer armour. Then Sergeant Hale barked at Alan specifically. "Merrick, you're the only engineer here. We need something. Anything." Alan didn't answer at first. His eyes drifted to the coil of comms wire at his feet, left over from the repair job he had tried finishing before the bombardment cut everything short. A spool of thin, flexible copper line, 24 gauge, not a weapon, not a trap, not in any traditional sense. But the idea that formed in his mind came so suddenly, so violently, that his pulse jumped. He knew the Tiger's weakness, not its armour, not its gun, but something simpler, its treads. The massive drive system had a vulnerability when torque peaked while the wheels were turning at low manoeuvring speeds. He read about it months ago in a manual for an entirely different vehicle. Under certain circumstances, a sudden locked resistance could snap a tension wheel or blow a track pin. But how could an engineer lock a Tiger's tread with nothing but wire? Unless the solution wasn't to stop the tread by force, but to force the machine into stopping itself. He grabbed the wire spool and tested its weight. The copper was thin, but there was a lot of it, maybe 60, 70 meters on the coil. Enough to stretch across the road if he moved fast. The Tiger wouldn't fear it, wouldn't even register it. But if the wire wound itself deep into the sprocket teeth, catching, tightening, knotting like a metal noose, the tank's own momentum might convert that thin copper into a catastrophic bind. He didn't think it would work, but he also knew they were out of options. "Merrick, what are you doing?" Hale shouted as Alan began running low to the ground, hugging the embankment as he sprinted toward the muddy road that cut through the forest and into their position. "Buying us 3 seconds," Alan muttered, though he doubted anyone heard. The ground trembled harder now. Branches fell from trees. Birds burst upward in chaotic spirals. The Tiger was at most 100 yards away, its barrel sweeping left and right with the lazy confidence of something that feared nothing on earth. Alan threw himself into a ditch, unravelling wire as he moved, letting the spool roll end over end. He tied one end to a broken fence post, his hands shaking not from fear, but from the freezing mud. Then he dragged the wire across the road, scrambling through the sludge, slipping, nearly falling face first as the vibrations intensified. He reached the far side and looked for something sturdy. Anything that wouldn't give, a fallen tree, a burnt support beam, a rusted tractor axle half buried in the earth. He looped the wire around it 3 times and twisted it tight, yanking until the copper bit into his palms. The trap looked pathetic, laughable. A tiger tank would crush through it like cotton thread. But if the timing was perfect, if the angle caught just right, if the wire fed into the sprocket teeth at high tension. He crawled backward, not daring to take his eyes off the approaching fog, and it was then that the tiger emerged, slow and deliberate, its monstrous frame pushing aside branches like they were curtains. The tank commander stood half exposed, scanning with binoculars, utterly calm. The machine was so close, Alan could smell the diesel fumes. Hear the whine of the turret motor, feel the pressure in his ribs from each rumbling rotation of the treads. The wire stretched across the road was invisible from the tank's height. Even if the crew saw it, they wouldn't care. Alan held his breath. His muscles spasmed from tension. The tank advanced. And then, the first contact. The tiger's left tread rolled over the wire. The copper snapped upward, tightening instantly around the rotating sprocket wheel. Alan felt the pull through the ground as the wire cinched, tightening, stretching to its absolute limit before the tank's weight forced it deeper into the teeth. The spool jolted violently, the anchored line twisting tighter and tighter. The tiger dragged another few feet. The copper wire screamed, a high metallic screech as it dug in. Then it happened. A sharp metallic crack like a gunshot split the air. The tiger lurched, its left side sagging. The tread spasmed violently as the wire locked, binding the sprocket and tearing through the tension system. Men across the field froze. Alan's breath turned to ice. The tiger bucked once, then stopped dead. The unstoppable monster had been halted, not by explosives, not by artillery, but by copper wire laid by a mud-soaked engineer with a desperate idea. As the tank crew scrambled, shouting in German, the immobilization lasted only seconds. But seconds were all the Americans needed. A bazooka team rose from behind rubble, steadied themselves, and fired. The rocket streaked through the fog. Alan watched it in silence, a single line of smoke slicing past him. The explosion tore through the tiger's flank. The forest lit up with fire. Alan dropped to his knees, not in triumph, but in disbelief that the insane idea had actually worked, that copper wire had brought down a tiger. And this, he later learned, would be only the beginning. Because as the men rallied, as the smoke thickened and the German line faltered, the battlefield would throw far more at Alan than a single tank. He had changed the fate of one moment, but war was not done testing him. The explosion that ripped through the tiger's flank rolled across the clearing like a collapsing thunderhead, the fireball curling upward before dissolving into a thick, oily column of smoke. Alan Merrick shielded his face from the heat, feeling the shockwave push grit against his cheeks. The once invincible machine now sat at an angle. Its left tread spilled from the hull like torn muscle. Flames licked around the engine compartment, snapping and spiralling as the crew inside scrambled to abandon their iron coffin. But war rarely gave men the chance to catch their breath. Before the smoke even cleared, the forest erupted with German rifle fire. The tiger had not come alone. Its escort units, infantry armed with MP40s, rifles, and at least one MG42, surged through the trees in a tide of grey uniforms and shouted orders. The American line staggered, but held, their return fire hammering against the advancing enemy. Branches splintered, dirt spat upward. Men ducked, cursed, and shouted for ammunition. Alan flattened himself against the ditch, heart thundering so hard he worried the enemy might hear it. His ears still rang from the bazooka blast, everything distant and muffled like sound moving through water. But he forced his eyes open, forced his limbs to respond. Engineers weren't meant to stay still. They moved, they solved, they improvised, or men died. Sergeant Hale sprinted toward him, sliding into cover with a grunt. "Merrick, that stunt worked! Damn miracle! But we're not done! They're trying to flank us!" Alan nodded, but didn't speak. His pulse was still trying to catch up with the moment. Hale shoved a Thompson into his hands anyway. "I know you hate guns, but today's your day to hate them less. Move!" The sergeant took off again, yelling for the bazooka team to reposition. Alan raised the Thompson, swallowing hard as he peered past the ditch. The forest line flickered with muzzle flashes. Germans were weaving between trees, using the Tiger's burning corpse as partial cover as they advanced. Suddenly, a fierce gust of heat washed over Alan. The Tiger's ammunition had begun cooking off. Small internal detonations cracked inside the hull. The Germans nearest the tank dove for safety, momentarily disoriented. American rifles found their marks. The line stabilized, but only barely. Alan crawled toward the destroyed farmhouse. Its roof collapsed inward like a broken rib cage. He reached what remained of the barn door, pushing through shattered boards until he spotted a half-buried toolbox beside a ruined wagon. His fingers closed around wire cutters, a hammer, pliers, even a cracked insulator from an old radio mast. Useless for killing, but perfect for creation. Because the German push was not slowing down. He backed out again, ducking as bullets tore through the doorframe inches from his ear. He sprinted behind the barn, arriving just as a squad of Americans dragged sandbags into a defensive pocket. The machine gunner swore, sweat pouring down his dust-caked face, the tripod jerking with each burst. Alan dropped beside them. "I need wire. Didn't you just use it? More!" A corporal tossed him a smaller spool, communications grade, not as strong as the last one. But Alan now knew something important. It didn't need to be strong. It only needed to jam something, even for 2 seconds. He glanced around, searching for the right spot. A narrow lane ran between 2 destroyed wagons, forming a natural funnel. The Germans would use it, their infantry doctrine demanded it. And Alan intended to trap it again, not for a tank this time, but for a weapon just as deadly, the MG-42 teams who were laying down suppressive fire. He slid into the lane, stringing wire low between the wheels of the wagons. He wound it tight, then anchored it to an iron stump that looked immovable. His breath came fast, harsh. Every second mattered. The bullets were getting closer, the dust clouds rising thicker from German boots. Suddenly, he froze. A faint rattling sound behind him. 2 Germans emerged through the wreckage, rifles raised. Alan threw himself sideways. Their shots cracked open the wood behind him. He rolled into the mud, Thompson slipping from his grip, landing a foot away. 1 German lunged, bayonet forward, teeth bared. Alan's hand closed around the pliers instead. He swung blindly. The blow caught the soldier's wrist, knocking the rifle aside. Alan threw himself upward, adrenaline powering instincts he didn't know he had. The German grappled, shoving Alan into the wagon wheel hard enough to rattle his skull. Alan gasped, struggled, grabbed anything he could. His fingers found the coil of wire still in his other hand. Without thinking, he whipped it upward, looping it across the German's helmet strap. The man clawed at it, momentarily blinded, and Alan seized the chance, grabbing his rifle and swinging the buttstock with desperate force. The German collapsed. The second soldier fired, the bullet slashing past Alan's shoulder. Alan hurled himself behind the wagon, feeling splinters rain over him like burning dust. The German advanced, cautious, measured, until the Thompson, lying in the mud, came into Alan's reach again. He grabbed it, rolled, fired 3 times. Silence followed. His hands trembled violently afterward. He despised killing. He despised what it did to a man's soul, but he also understood what failure meant on a battlefield like this. He crawled back to the wire. It was still intact. The trap still held. Now all he needed was the enemy to walk right into it. Minutes later, the MG-42 team charged down the lane exactly as predicted. The gunner hunkered forward, assistant feeding ammunition behind him. They were focused entirely on the American machine gun nest ahead, not the invisible wire low across their boots. Their momentum carried them over it, and then the wire snapped up, hooking the gunner's ankle. The man pitched forward violently, slamming into the ground. The MG-42 clattered away. The assistant tripped over him. Their fall created a brief, chaotic tangle, and that was all the Americans needed. Grenades arced overhead, exploding in bursts of dirt and ringing steel. The lane turned into a storm of shouting, gunfire, and debris. Alan pressed himself flat, watching through his fingers as the MG-42 threat dissolved under the counterattack. But as soon as this small victory echoed across their line, the forest answered with something worse. A second engine. He felt it before he heard it. A different tone, lower, deeper, a growl that vibrated through the soil like a subterranean drum. Men all along the American positions looked up, faces pale, breath freezing. If one tiger had been sent to break them, then the second had been sent to finish them. Alan rose slowly, exhaustion burning through every limb. His mind spun, still recovering from the close fight, still processing the horror of another 80-ton beast entering the fray. Sergeant Hale approached, panting hard. "We can't hold another tiger. We're almost spent. You got anything left, Merrick? Any miracles?" Alan stared at the wire cutters in his hand, the last few meters of copper dragging across the mud. His mind raced. He had barely stopped the first one, and that had taken perfect circumstances, the right angle, the right moment. The second tiger would not make the same mistake, unless he forced it to, unless he changed the battlefield itself. His eyes drifted toward the ditch, the fallen telegraph poles still lying at an angle, cables dangling like exposed nerves. An idea sparked, insane, reckless, possible only in the last hour of a long war. He moved toward the pole, ignoring Hale's shouts. He dug into the mud, searching for the grounding point. The buried junction box beneath the collapsed earth. Because if he could redirect the tension of the collapsing pole at the exact moment the tiger passed, he could turn gravity itself into a weapon. He began ripping away mud with his bare hands. Behind him, the forest grew louder. The second tiger was coming. And this time, no one believed they'd survive. But Alan was not done yet. Not while he still had wire. Not while he still had ideas. Not while his brothers in arms were still breathing. The earth trembled again, and the engineer kept digging. The soil felt colder the deeper Alan dug, as though the earth itself recoiled from what was approaching. The second tiger's growl throbbed through the trees, shaking loose pine needles that fell like green snow. Every vibration crawled into Alan's bones, pushing him faster, harder. His fingernails tore against stone and frozen mud as he pulled away clumps of earth from the half-buried junction box beneath the fallen telegraph pole. The German engineers who had installed the communications line years earlier would never have imagined that an American field tech might one day weaponize their work. He finally exposed the metal casing and ripped it open with the pliers. The interior was a mess of frayed cables and shattered ceramic. But the key was not the box. It was the tension line running up the pole, still connected to the top, where insulators held the steel cable taut. The telegraph pole, thrown down during the first bombardment, leaned at a dangerous angle, its base cracked, its top suspended partly above the ditch. Only the cable connecting it to the next pole prevented it from collapsing entirely. If the cable were cut at the base at the perfect moment, the upper half of the pole would swing downward with enormous force. If a Tiger tank happened to be passing beneath that arc, Alan didn't know if it would crush the turret or simply stun the crew. But even disabling its optics or cracking the turret ring for a moment might be enough to give the Americans a fighting chance. They didn't need total destruction, just opportunity. He wiped mud from his brow, breathing hard as he examined the steel line. It hummed faintly from tension. He tested it with the back of his hand. Tight, almost singing. Perfect. But cutting it outright would cause the pole to fall immediately, wasting the chance. He needed something else. A trigger mechanism. A delay. His hand drifted to the remaining wire spool. Copper wasn't strong enough to hold the pole by itself, but it could hold a wedge in place. A wedge that, once released, would allow the pole to swing down under stored tension. He scrambled toward the broken farmhouse again, searching through debris like a madman. Boards, nails, shattered tools. Then finally, beneath a collapsed beam, He spotted a triangular wooden block from a dismantled doorframe. Heavy, thick, perfect. He lifted it and grunted from the weight. A wedge large enough to hold the telegraph pole suspended until he released it. He dragged it back to the ditch, sweat streaking through the grime on his face despite the cold. The Tiger's engine grew louder with every second, now accompanied by shouted German commands echoing through the forest. The Americans braced at their positions, but morale trembled. They had seen what one Tiger could do. Now another approached, angling for the same crossroads. Alan jammed the wedge beneath the pole near its midpoint, forcing all his weight into it to press it tight. The pole dipped slightly, but held, suspended above the ditch. Good. Now all that remained was the trigger line. He wrapped copper wire around the wedge and directed it up the slope, back toward the American positions. The idea was simple. Pull the wire, yank the wedge free, let gravity finish the job. But it had to be timed to seconds, maybe less. He crawled backward up the muddy bank, unwinding wire as he went, until he reached a shattered stone wall 10 meters away. This would be his vantage point. Close to danger, close enough to see the Tiger, but with cover to survive the first few moments of chaos. He peeked through a crack in the wall, and there it was. The second Tiger tank rolled into view through the thinning fog, its shape emerging like a steel spectre. The matte grey hull gleamed faintly, where frost still clung to the armour. Its massive 80mm gun pointed forward, already tracking the American positions. The commander stood half exposed from the turret, scanning the battlefield as if he already knew victory was inevitable. The infantry escort moved confidently behind it, ready to exploit whatever carnage the tank produced. Alan's stomach tied itself in a knot. This Tiger was smarter. It advanced slower, scanning for traps. The first tank's destruction had not gone unnoticed. The crew was wary, but the telegraph pole trap was invisible from their angle. He crouched low, clutching the copper wire tightly, his breathing turning shallow. The Tiger rolled closer, 20 meters, 15. The engine throbbed like a heartbeat of an ancient beast. Every foot of progress crushed branches, stones, and abandoned gear beneath its tracks. Its weight made the earth pulse. Closer. 10 meters. Alan's hands began to shake uncontrollably. He forced himself to steady his grip on the wire. He counted the timing in his mind. The pole needed momentum, enough drop height to maximize impact. Too early, and the tank would shrug it off. Too late, and the turret would clear it. 5 meters. Alan swallowed. His vision tunneled, focusing on the exact point where the turret would align with the downward arc of the pole. 4, 3, 2. The Tiger's turret swung slightly, adjusting for a target. That motion presented the angled side plate directly under the suspended pole. Alan pulled, hard. The wire bit into his palms as the wedge tore free. The telegraph pole fell. Not gracefully, violently. The tension cable snapped upward, releasing the upper pole in a downward swing so fast it blurred. The whoosh of air sounded like a whip cracking. Then the pole struck the Tiger's turret with a force that echoed across the clearing like a battering ram hitting stone. The impact was catastrophic. The turret jolted sideways, the commander thrown backward violently into the hatch edge. The optics shattered instantly. The shockwave inside the tank must have been enormous because the machine halted its advance, engine roaring but no longer coordinated. The hull twisted as the crew scrambled in confusion. Alan kept pulling the wire, dragging the pole downward until it wedged itself between the turret and the hull. The Tiger attempted to rotate its turret, but couldn't. The massive gun shuddered and stopped. The turret ring was jammed. Sergeant Hale saw the moment and roared a command the entire line heard. Now! Hit it! Now! American machine guns and rifles opened fire from every angle. Bazooka teams rushed from cover. The Tiger tried reversing, but the jammed turret prevented the gunner from engaging targets. Panic inside the crew grew visible in their frantic movements around the hatches. A bazooka fired. It struck the Tiger's rear plate, sparks flying, armour buckling but not quite pierced. A second bazooka team positioned at a flank fired as well. The rocket hit lower this time, the engine compartment, Fire erupted in the rear vents. The engine coughed, sputtered, then screamed as it seized. Smoke belched upward. German infantry began shouting in sheer panic, realizing their armored support was dying before their eyes. The Tiger crew bailed. One man leapt from the turret, rolling as bullets zipped past him. Another climbed out the side hatch, coughing violently. A third dragged himself from the rear, only to fall when a burst from an M1 cut into the dirt beside him. With their invincible spear broken, the German formation faltered. Machine gun teams scattered. Riflemen broke their advance. Some retreated into the forest. Others dropped their weapons entirely. The psychological blow of watching a Tiger tank disabled, not by a tank, not by artillery, but by the terrain itself, shattered whatever momentum they had planned. The Americans surged forward. Alan stayed crouched behind the stone wall, chest heaving, his palms burning from where the wire had torn into them. He watched the Tiger smoulder, black smoke rising in thick spirals. The telegraph pole still lay jammed across the turret, like a broken limb draped over a wounded animal. He never imagined that anything he built, anything at all, would ever touch a Tiger tank in combat. And now he had stopped too. The battle raged for another half hour, but the German force never recovered. Without their armoured fists, their infantry lacked coordination. American units tightened the perimeter, advanced in waves, and finally secured the crossroads. When the shooting ceased, Sergeant Hale found Alan sitting in the mud, staring at his torn hands. "Merrick," Hale said, voice hoarse, "you're either insane, blessed, or the luckiest damn engineer in the entire US Army." Alan didn't look up. He simply stared at the burnt Tiger tank, smoke blowing sideways in the cold wind. "I just didn't want anyone else to die today," he whispered. Hale sat beside him. "Well, you saved all of us. With wire. Actual damn wire." Alan cracked a tired smile. "Don't forget the telegraph pole." Hale laughed. The first real laugh since dawn, then clapped a hand on Alan's shoulder. "Command's going to have a field day with this story. Stopping a Tiger tank in 3 seconds and a second one with a falling pole. You've written yourself into every engineer manual from here to the Pacific." But that made Alan shake his head. "No manuals," he said softly. "War shouldn't teach men how to do this. It should teach them how to never need to." The wind carried the last smoke from the battlefield, revealing the ruined Tiger in full. Its turret jammed, its engine dead, its legend broken. Alan Merrick stood slowly, exhaustion weighing him down, but his resolve still firm. Around him, soldiers began rebuilding defences, tending the wounded, and gathering the fallen with solemn respect. The wire spool lay at his feet, nearly empty now. He lifted it, held it a moment, then whispered almost to himself, 3 seconds. The trick that should never have worked. The weapon that wasn't a weapon. The idea born from desperation, fear, and one engineer's refusal to surrender. It had changed the battle. It had saved his brothers. It had stopped the deadliest tank on the Western Front. And somewhere in the silent aftermath, Alan understood something deeper. War could take everything from a man. But sometimes, in the narrowest moment between terror and courage, it also revealed who he truly was.